pushing me.
Not many people got a code to live by anymore. Hey, look at that. Look at those assholes over there. Ordinary fucking people. I hate them.
Me too.
What do you know, kid? See, an ordinary person spends his life avoiding tense situations. Repo man spends his life getting into tense situations.
Then we followed up with
Assholes.
Wilson and Mike.
Let's go get a drink.
When the psychiatrist asked me how I felt about Raymond Shaw, how I personally felt about him, and how the whole patrol felt about him, did you hear what I said? Did you really hear what I said? I said Raymond Shaw is the kindest, warmest, bravest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life. And even now I feel that way, this minute. And yet, somewhere in the back of my mind, something tells me it's not true. It's just not true. It isn't as if Raymond's hard to like. He's impossible to like.
It is an article of faith in economics that people are motivated by money. I've never fully bought into this thesis. I believe that people do things for lots of reasons, including money. For example, some people on some occasions desire to help other people. It does seem that it is possible, however, to view all human activity through a prism of economic self-interest if you're cynical enough. In May 2009, some of the richest people in the world, including Bill Gates, David Rockefeller, Ted Turner, George Soros, and Oprah, met to discuss how they could use their money to slow the growth of the world's population. This was not a problem of recent concern. In 1798, an English cleric and economist named Thomas Robert Malthus published a paper entitled The Principle of Population as it Affects the Improvement of Society. In this paper, he argued, in essence, that while human population grows geometrically, food and resources grow arithmetically. He argued that ultimately the want of food leads to famine and war, which in turn leads to poverty and depopulation. Malthus believed that the answer to the trap is birth control, and specifically by moral restraint. We can see with our own eyes that Malthus is probably mistaken in his thesis. The evidence is that the wealthiest countries, those which have the most food and are the most productive, have the lowest fertility rates. On the other hand, countries with the least amount of food have the highest fertility rates. In any event, Malthus was very influential in 19th century science. His work led to study of the question whether or not humanity can be improved through controlled breeding. For example, if we can breed dogs and racehorses, why not humans? This study is called eugenics, and it has a terrible history. The idea can be traced at least as far back as Plato, who recommended that the state run a program to strengthen the guardian class. The goal was twofold. First, to encourage people of good health to reproduce together, and second, to end certain diseases and disabilities. Indeed, at the foundation of Planned Parenthood is the relatively defensible argument that if the millions of dollars which are now expended in the care and maintenance of those who in all kindness should never have been brought into this world were converted to a system of bonuses to unfit parents, paying them to refrain from further parenthood, and continuing to pay them while they controlled their procreative faculties, this would not only be a profitable investment, but also the salvation of American civilization. The Nazis perverted this seemingly benign and some might say common sense proposal. They developed policies to euthanize people with incurable physical and mental illnesses. In addition, they tried to selectively breed people for Aryan traits, such as athleticism, blonde hair, and blue eyes. These policies quickly expanded to a ban on marriages of people in particular groups, forced sterilization, and internment at concentration camps. Eventually, it all led to the final solution for promoting Germany's national health. But it wasn't just the Nazis. In 1927, the United States Supreme Court heard the case of Buck versus Bell. The case was an appeal by a feeble-minded woman who herself was the daughter of a feeble-minded woman and was also herself the mother of a feeble-minded child. She was appealing a decision by the state of Virginia upon a duly enacted statute to sterilize her. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the opinion of the court. The court upheld the order of the state of Virginia. Justice Holmes reasoned that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Nevertheless, debate continues over the essential proposition on the question whether the seemingly higher goals of eugenics can be distinguished from the morally reprehensible programs of the past. I mention this because when we analyze what's going on with COVID-19 and the so-called vaccines, we should be thorough. We should ask whether something more is going on besides a drive for profits or an effort to save people. I have stated my skepticism. There is no doubt in my mind that the China flu was created in a lab and that the Chinese failed to give the world fair warning of its release into the population. As far as I'm concerned, the only open questions in this vein are whether the virus was created as a biological weapon and whether it was intentionally released into the population. We can leave these questions and the question of retribution for another time. At this point, I will focus on the possibility of other motives in the creation of the China flu and the so-called vaccine, and the imposition of the related social controls.
They developed about 35 vaccines, and 4 of them were really promising. They chose the 4 most promising, and they gave them to ferrets, which is the animal that is most analogous to human beings when it comes to upper lung respiratory infections. The ferrets had a brilliant, robust, and durable antibody response. But then something horrible happened. And those ferrets were challenged when they were exposed to the wild virus. They got horribly sick. They got inflammation throughout their bodies, and they died. There was something that they called enhanced immune response. It's also called pathogenic priming. And what it means is that when you get the vaccine, it appears you have an antibody response, but when you actually encounter the wild virus, you become much sicker. And it actually creates a pathway that virus hurts you a lot more than with unvaccinated people. So the danger with the coronavirus vaccine is that you really need to test it on animals first to make sure whatever the vaccine is, that we don't get that that really great immune response followed by lethal infections.
Exactly.
And it's very, very strange to me and seems almost criminally reckless that Anthony Fauci is allowing these companies to skip animal trials and to go directly to human trials.
The inference from the ferret experiments is that we appear now to have the technology not only to develop viruses, but also vaccines to counter the viruses we create. This is precisely Bill Gates' Windows business model, with Windows itself having been stolen from Apple. But I digress. Obviously, if it is true that we can create viruses and vaccines in conjunctions, it is not necessarily also true that we can develop vaccines or other countermeasures for naturally occurring coronaviruses or other infections. Nor apparently do we have the slightest clue how injections designed to counter lab-created infections will affect our ability to fight naturally occurring pathogens. The point is simply that it appears that once someone is on the needle, he'll never be able to get off of it. In theory, the pharmaceutical companies can release a new virus every so often, and this will force people to line up for injections, which will be funded out of the government's treasury, our tax dollars. Further, to be most effective as a social control mechanism, each new coronavirus is likely to be more lethal than the previous one, which in turn will force an increasing number of resistors into the line. Once most of the population is under this control, the power over the supply of injections, or more pertinently, the power to cut off the supply, will be power unprecedented in human history. This begs the question, why would anyone ever want to cut off the supply of necessary injections? Right now, the federal debt is about $28 trillion. This is money which can never be repaid. This is money which will never be repaid. In short, the United States has set the default on its debt, or at least some of it, in no small part due to the decision to wage illegal regime change wars in the Middle East. At least 23% of this debt is owed to the government itself. 13% is owed just to the Social Security Trust Fund, to which we have all been contributing our entire lives. The debt held by the public, including foreign countries, includes debts owed to public and private pension funds, insurance companies, and mutual funds. Thus, a default would create a catastrophic upheaval in social order. If retired and infirm people have no income and are unable to work, society as we know it will collapse. There's no two ways about this. On the other hand, this catastrophe is avoidable if people die before they can collect Social Security or their pensions, or cash in their mutual funds and government bonds. In my book, this is a powerful motive for sinister activity. Further, this is a phenomenon which can be explained by the fundamental thesis of economics. The natural tendency of capital is to concentrate. However, the more capital concentrates, the more averse it becomes to risk. People who have little money are willing to take much bigger risks than people with a lot of money. At some point, money can become so concentrated that the economy is destabilized. Not only will you have less investment in creativity and innovation, because that carries too much risk, you will usually also have a captured government. This will lead to policies which facilitate further concentration of capital, such as tax breaks for the rich, questionable spending priorities, and unsound budget and debt management. At some point, the few will have far too much power and will use that power to consolidate their power even more. If you add the ability to suppress revolt into the mix, you'll end up in a very alarming place. In conclusion, these are not pleasant issues to consider. The thought that the rich created a virus to sell a vaccine, which in turn makes people dependent upon endless injections, is horrifying. As is the thought that they've done this not just for the profits in the pharmaceuticals, but also as a way to consolidate their power and to avoid paying the debts they owe. The fact of the matter is that the China flu hardly rates as a pandemic. By comparison, the Spanish flu killed 83 times as many people on a per capita basis. And this is if the government's numbers on death by COVID-19 can be believed. Another genuine pandemic, the Black Plague, which has resurfaced in some poverty-stricken areas of America, killed 1,700 times the number of people who are alleged to have been killed by COVID-19. I'm not arguing that COVID-19 shouldn't be taken seriously. Instead, the point is that our response to it has been disproportionate. Hence, we should be suspicious about why our society and the world at large was subject to such intense propaganda. What has occurred with the response to the China flu and is now occurring with the injections is right out of the CIA's playbook. We know that mass delusions can be induced. The key is to create fear by isolating people, using the media to pound the message, and suppressing dissent. Most people actually take comfort in this kind of induced delusion. Essentially, people allow themselves to be hypnotized with a few simple slogans repeated day in and day out because it makes them feel better. It would be naive to believe that all of this has just been happenstance.